we're in the outsourcing business, so we kind of have a good understanding of it. And we thought it'd be helpful to share with folks a wide variety of things. So we have a good mix of folks. We have people that are involved with boards that run companies, investors. We also have large corporate representation and smaller startup corporate representation, as well as people that are now in smaller organizations that left bigger organizations. So I think we've got a good mix for folks for you. With that said, I want to introduce to my left Doug Lawrence, the CEO of CeQur. To my right, Don Casey. He's the CEO of Cardinal's medical segment. And then Dr. Chris Dunn, who's a board member of Genesis, as well as a life science angel investor. With that said, we wanted to talk, and we had some interesting conversations prior to our panel today about the different things in outsourcing. And one of the subject matters that came up right out of the box was people don't realize what's been outsourced. So what I'd like to ask the panel, if you don't mind, and we'll kind of rotate around if it's okay with the folks, what currently is being outsourced by some of the companies today? So I don't know if, Chris, if you want to start and we'll work our way across.
Sure.
Of what you're seeing outsourced?
Yeah, just to take a step or two back, I'm a member of what's called Life Science Angels. It's an angel investing group in Palo Alto, California, just south of San Francisco. Been around 10 years, and we invest as a group in about 6 companies a year, so a total of about 60 companies, which are all in life sciences. And we started off in device and in bio, and now we have digital. And we've had a number of them become successful. And I'm on the board of a number of these companies because we like to put a member from Life Science Angels on a board when we invest. Typically it's the A round, and I'm also a consultant and observer to some additional ones. So the small company is the specialty, if you will, that I'm involved in related to this. I'm also a physician, by the way, pulmonary critical care medicine, and I've also served as a CMO at my local hospital, chief medical officer. So I've seen a lot of medicine from the side of the hospital as well. But for the small startup companies, the outsourcing question comes up immediately. They frequently get funded with what's a relatively small amount of money. To them it seems big, $1 million, a couple $1 million, and they will then look at all the different things that they have to accomplish related to IP, related eventually to manufacturing, R&D, and they will outsource just about everything. It's easier to actually say, what do they keep in-house? And what I think they keep in-house is the CEO position for fundraising. And I would say a lot of the R&D, although you can even outsource the R&D, you certainly can outsource the clinical piece, CRO, clinical research organizations. You can outsource manufacturing. They outsource the CFO position, the accounting position. And when it gets into the sales and marketing, a lot of times in the establishment of the company, that's kind of takes a back seat. That's almost like, hey, we'll be really lucky if we someday end up with this issue of having to commercialize our product. So in some of their original business plans, there isn't a lot of attention paid to marketing and sales. And so the issue doesn't come up until down the road, and then it's sort of a direct sales versus distributor kind of a decision. But we can talk more about that later.
Don, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, sure. And I'd absolutely build on what Chris said. And my company, Cardinal Health, we kind of do both. We're a distributor on one side of the house, and we're a products company on the other side of the house. And the fact that we're a distribution company allows us to have, provide sales and logistics services to partners. And interestingly, the biggest challenge for us is our product company doesn't like using our service company because they can go find other people who could do it better. But just to build on what Chris is saying, I think our industry is probably 10 years behind where pharma is, and probably 20 years behind where actually movies are. If you look at probably a really interesting content play that's morphed over time, the studios used to do everything, and they used to market it, they used to own the theaters all the way down. Today, the reason you get to see 7 people in the beginning with their, it's First Street, it's Bad Robot, it's this, is because different people now will develop movies. It'll be financed by a studio and it'll go into somebody else's distribution network. Pharma is kind of the same way. Very few large pharmaceutical firms are now doing proprietary research. They'll go buy the research and drop it on a shared network that allow them to do the sales and marketing. So, our industry, there's still, I think, an inherent bias that we're going to do everything, as Chris just said, from R&D all the way down to sales and marketing. And I think the core question we have to ask ourselves is, what do you really need to be great at? I mean, if you're, I can see Carol Neubauer back there. If you're Bieber on what's absolutely essential, and they might declare we've got to have a great relationship with the physician, we've got to have great manufacturing, but then what else do we need to do in between? So I tend to think we as an industry probably are behind other models that have had to deal with similar challenges to what we're dealing with, and are still a little bit biased to keeping everything inside under the illusion or delusion that we're better at every single thing than anyone else could be.
Absolutely. Doug, would you like to chime in and tell us a little bit about CeQur as well?
Sure, yeah. So CeQur is a startup company that's focused on the development of the PAC, which is a small wearable insulin patch pump. It provides all the insulin needs for a patient for 3 full days and removes the burden of injection from a type 2 diabetes patient's life. And to bring this product to market, we're going to be needing to commercialize it to reach an audience of roughly 11 million patients in the US and Europe through an audience of endocrinology. So there's about 5,000 call points that we need to reach in the United States with a message about this product. And so to do that, CeQur is focused on what we really need to be excellent at. And so up until now, we've largely been a research and development project for the last 5 years. And we've focused on building strategic capability to lead the functions in-house. But after that, absolutely, the comment would be, what isn't outsourced? We're doing all of our clinical research outside. We're planning to scale up through contract manufacturing. We're doing our HR function through TriNet. Pretty much, you can go around the organization and say, we're clearly seeking to leverage capabilities outside the company everywhere we can to maximize the value to our shareholders of the scarce money. And we're a relatively well-funded startup, but even so, the pressure is on to deliver the maximum for the money that's been put into the company.
Well, if you don't mind, because Doug actually has great experience of both big corporate and as well as startup aspects, can you share a little bit more about an example, perhaps in the past, where you've used outsourcing, and then we can get into all of you a little bit of pros and cons, if you don't mind, about that, and then drill into commercialization. But if you don't mind sharing a little bit of that, that'd be great.
So prior to coming to CeQur a couple of years ago, I spent most of my career at a very large company, Becton Dickinson. And so I can cite one example in particular where having an outsourced sales force effort was very beneficial to a large company. And that's, for a while I was involved in the diagnostics business at BD. And we had a product called Veritor to launch. And Veritor is a small handheld digital reader that reads lateral flow tests for respiratory disease. And it was an innovative new product and a bit of a challenge for a large company like Becton Dickinson that had a very focused sales force, extremely effective at reaching central labs and hospitals with a large basket of products. But if you think about what the challenge is when you're launching a new and innovative product into a different call point within a large company, you have this trade-off of can I get enough focus on the launched product out of this existing sales force, and then also, do I have a downside from distracting the existing sales force with this exciting new thing? Perhaps it pulls attention away from sustaining the existing business, which is a very large and very important business. So we were able to outsource our selling effort for this product through Salesforce for Hire, and it turned out to be a really good experience. We were able to get a small group of people focused on a call point outside of hospital core lab, which was primary care physician, able to demonstrate that the product had tremendous uptake, and it turned out to be a big success for the company and continues to be a success at Becton Dickinson and a major driver of growth in the diagnostics group there.
Absolutely, and it's kind of interesting when you think of things that outsourced. I was kind of chatting with my wife. I was coming here, and I said, I need a generic example, and she referenced mowing the lawn. And we're going to talk a little about the pros and cons, and I'll give you something to think about. So we actually hired someone to mow our lawn, which is kind of neat, but they mowed the lawn on Monday. I travel all week. I come home on Friday. The lawn looked like it needed to be mowed, and I paid someone to mow it. Right? So there's an example of one of the negatives of outsourcing of an opportunity. But I'd like to hear from you a little bit, Don, if you don't mind, of some of the things you might think pros and cons of outsourcing. And then Chris
well. First, I mean, how much are we talking about paying the lawn guy? Because if you're going to outsource, you could provide. I don't know. You could provide additional incentive to the outsourcer, like an extra $5. He might have shown up on Friday.
That's right.
Would have worked out all good, one way or another. I think the interesting thing on pros and cons, and it's interesting. You almost have to divide what are you going to outsource into terms of customer-facing points versus non-customer-facing points, and if you're going to outsource the customer-facing things, whether that's Salesforce, whether that's customer service, whether it's contracting and pricing and whatnot, I think it's absolutely imperative that your partner, whether it's a Salesforce for hire or somebody, has skin in the game. And there has to be 100% alignment into what the ultimate objectives are. And I think, remember, the outsourcer is going to try and leverage something that they have. All right, I happen to have people available that are going to go call an endocrinologist, or they're going to go call a urologist or whatever, and they're going to lever that. So how do you make sure that there is a complete alignment and incentive? So sometimes I think that's a challenge, that you got to make sure that you're trying to only pay the lawn guy, $10, and you might wind up getting your lawn cut on Monday, when in fact you want your lawn cut on a Saturday, and you might have to either pay $20 to get that to happen. So I think you got to put skin in the game and a clear objective. And there's something like, if you look at back office, and Tata has been so generous in supporting AdvaMed over time. If you talk about them, the interesting issue is, how do you develop a contract? So these guys have done an enormous amount of IT work for Cardinal Health. And how do you basically get a contract where there's skin in the game, and people like them would actually take risk? So again, I think it's incumbent on you, as you're building that partnership, to get shared alignment onto what the objective is, and then put some risk in the game where there's got to be agreement that says, hey, look, if you over-deliver, you're going to get overpaid. If you under-deliver, you're going to have skin in the game. But again, I almost think it's the same principle, but think about things in terms of customer-facing versus internal.
So that's an interesting point. So when we think of some of the things we've been involved in, being an outsourced company, and we actually share in the risk as well, I'm curious, Chris, how you as an investor, when you hear one of your companies is considering outsourcing, what do you think?
Well, as I was saying earlier, so many of the functions are already outsourced. I live again in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have quite a number of companies that originate there, and we have the incredible luxury of having outsourced capabilities in just about every area you can think of in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it's almost routine. In fact, I would say most of the companies that we invest in probably have 5 or fewer employees, and so you have to outsource. The situation that comes up, which is a shortfall, in my view, of these companies over time, is the fact that they miss the fact that there's actually 2 customers that they have to identify and they have to be aware of throughout the entire time that they're a company. The one that always comes to mind with a medical device is the doctor/patient. And so that's what they're designing the actual device for. But there's a second customer that they just don't talk about, and it's like people like me on the board who have to keep reminding them. Ultimately, keep the end in mind here. The end in mind is that you're going to sell this company to a large strategic. That's what's going to happen. Out of our 60 companies, we've had 1 go public. That just doesn't happen. And if you think you're going to be a Google or an Apple, that isn't going to happen either. You're going to get acquired by a large company, and that's a good thing. That's how you as a founder get money, get paid for all your years of hard work. That's how the investors get paid. And so you have to position yourself with what needs to be done correctly for a strategic eventually to buy you. And there's a lot of steps there along the way. One piece that I find consistently missing, quite frankly, is a result of the kind of CEO that these companies have. They frequently have a physician as the founder CEO, or an engineer. Could be a chemical engineer, an electrical engineer, some kind of engineering type. What they don't have is they don't have any marketing or sales experience, as in usually 0. And in fact, sometimes it's even worse than that. Sometimes they have a negative view of marketing and sales. The piece that I see that is so important is that marketing analysis. You don't see it in their business plans, or it's given short shrift. And before you get into sales, you have to have a marketing plan that makes sense, that's been researched, that's been looked at thoroughly, that's been done outsourced, I think, because again, the companies themselves don't have the capability of doing that. And I will say, I've had the experience echoed here, where Salesforce for hire sounds like it's sales, but they actually do an extraordinarily good and thorough marketing evaluation before anybody in sales is ever touched or brought into the organization. So outsourcing for this particular piece, I think for the small startup company, again, that's where I live, is essential kind of one way or another.
Yeah, just for clarity purposes, so Salesforce for Hire is a holding company, is a wholly owned subsidiary of McGeever, which is a holding company and a family office. They're investing in companies aren't performing. They created Salesforce for Hire to get after and make those work. Fast forward 15 years, Salesforce for Hire is now a freestanding entity that does it for 4 types of companies. They'll do it for other investor-driven startups, and that's real important. We're not interested in lifestyle companies. non-healthcare companies coming into healthcare, international companies coming to the US market. Matter of fact, I was chatting with a couple of my friends from Australia. We're learning about doing business with Australian companies as well. We just did a deal there. And then the one we didn't expect is much to Doug's experience as well with large corporations. And it's kind of the prototyping of a model. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about that concept when you think of outsourcing. What helps you validate a company's a good outsourcing opportunity for your company? Do you mind sharing a little bit on that?
So, I think particularly as a small company CEO, accessing capabilities. So things that, capabilities are difficult to build, they take time, they take money, they take attention. So if I have the opportunity to outsource and access best practices right away without having to hire people to figure out how to do things internally, that's a tremendous advantage as a small company CEO, and that's what we're seeking when we're outsourcing. Where can we go find contract manufacturing that will take us to world class in one step? We don't want to have to learn these things on our own. And so when I look at commercial outsourcing, I'm looking for capabilities that we would have to build to be a world-class selling organization. The ability to deliver messages through tablet-based software, for instance, is one very simple example. The HR systems required to hire, to manage the turnover of a large sales force, the ability to deal with state regulations for every state around the country. None of this is really critical to the success of my small business. What's really critical is getting my message out to that audience of 5,000 endocrinologists in as clear a way as possible. And so if I can outsource that capability, I would do it in a heartbeat. And I would also say that I think even very large companies outsource selling all the time. When you think about going outside the United States, the decision to go to a distributor in a particular country, it just comes naturally. So I think it isn't that foreign to think about doing it here in our home market in the United States.
Yeah, I would agree. Another thing too is, I was curious, how many people in the audience lease a car? What's happening a lot of times in the outsource world is companies are doing an outsource relationship with a clear understanding they expect to move it inside. So it's always an interesting thing to look at that when you look at the business opportunities. Having custom developed product for you is a really important thing. So one of the things that's always interesting is when you have kind of off-the-shelf sales and commercialization activities plugged in versus a custom-built one. But I want to know, Chris, from your perspective a little bit, as you look at opportunities for outsourcing and a company comes to you, what helps you help the company qualify one of those outsourcing opportunities?
Well, it's like any other outsourcing opportunity. You need to interview all the prospective companies that you think would be applicable to what you're looking at. So certainly in the sales, what typically happens, I would say, for these companies that I'm involved in, they go very linearly, and when they finally get to a point where they have a product approved and a reimbursement there, and now they're looking to sell it, to commercialize it in their view, they will hire a couple of salespeople, maybe 2 or 3, and one of them will get the label VP of Sales and Marketing, regardless of whether they've ever been a VP of anything, or regardless of whether marketing is in their bag of core competencies. And those couple of salespeople will then start to generate the sales of the company. So frankly, I'm again looking at a strategy which is more inclusive and more thorough and aimed not only at the customer, as I say, of the doctor-patient, but also a strategy that is going to position you for the strategic that one day is going to buy your company. It's going to be absorbed by them because there's tremendous synergies with a lot of these larger companies, and they also need to constantly be bringing in new products and services. So they're looking for these kinds of companies that many of you are part of here. That's what AdvaMed is all about in one sense. So I'm looking for that strategy that precedes the actual sale so that they're linked together, much more effective, much more powerful. That's the way I've seen it.
So my background is I was with J&J in a company called Ceres, but when I was a sales rep in Brooklyn, New York for J&J, I used to get very frustrated when they would send in someone from corporate and they would come into the OR and I'd have a great relationship with a key doc and they would send a marketing person in with a product that we know nothing about. And they were checking to see if it tested from a prototype perspective. And it was always frustrating, and I always used to come up with some reason why that marketing person couldn't get in the OR today. There was something wrong, they weren't letting people in, patient wouldn't sign off, anything I could do to keep them out. But I was curious for you, Don, and I think of Cardinal, and I think of all the products that go through Cardinal. If I'm a smaller company and I'm using an outsourced sales organization, and I'm trying to get you to support us, how do you look at that from your perspective from Cardinal when you?
Well, you got to look at it two ways. From our perspective, it's what capabilities can we bring you, and what are you willing to pay us? I mean, it's really not more complicated than that. One of the challenges is, as you look at we have probably 3 core services that impact most people here, which is we'll do basic logistics, we'll do order to cash, and then we'll do some selling, and then the selling is going to probably go at a GPO level, a economic buyer level, and a physician level. And it really depends on where we think we've got expertise. But the most important thing is that the company that shows up needs to know what they want. I think the biggest challenge, as you go through, somebody says, they wander in and say, well, we want this, well, we want that, and we want that, and we want that, and we want that. Whereas we can probably be more helpful if you sit there and say, look, we have a go-to-market strategy that involves everything from customer segmentation all the way to how are you going to get a product to them. There's probably 20 core steps there, and having thought that through. So, by and large, what we're looking to do is understand where are you and do we have those capabilities? And then, ultimately, we are a for-profit entity, and some of it's like what kind of economic rewards are there, because we don't have limitless resources. So if there's 2 or 3 people that want to access our ability to sell urology products to HPG, it's okay, well, these guys can do this, these guys can do this. And then, what are the economics involved that make it attractive for us to do it? But, for us, it's really, let's make sure that we can deliver, because ultimately, you get one chance to have a great partnership, and, so economics are really critical, but ultimately, you want a relationship that's going to last a long, long time.
Well, let me ask a little more detail on the economics. So when you look at a company, so I have 2 companies coming to you. One has gone and did some outsourcing, created a small sales force, modeled out, okay, this is the customer engagement process, this is the cycle, and they can share that to you. Another company calls up and said they're willing to do business with you, but they don't have any experience. Does that help you vet out an opportunity, or does it still fall in the category of economics, general economics?
Well, I mean, clearly the first company that's actually done some thinking, it's going to be a much smoother meeting where, it's basically they're working off a menu. Said, I'd like an hors d'oeuvre, I would like a main course, and I would like a dessert. I think the company that doesn't define that, it's going to be a 2 or 3 iteration process, which actually burns time for both parties. Okay. So it goes back to, Kevin has really mentioned, it's understand what you need, and understand, look at a process, from beginning to end. And, while none of us are going to get up here and say we're Lean Six Sigma experts, virtually, because you just talked about it, hey, have you done an identification of who your customer is? Have you done the identification as to who the buyer is? Have you done the identification how you're going to reach them? I do think that whether you've outsourced that part of it or not, having some basic answers to some of those questions certainly facilitates the process.
So let's talk a little bit about, Doug, some of the things that an outsource company, actually for all of you as well. So if you're going to outsource, what are some of the back office things you'd expect? I know you touched a little bit on it, but I guess I'm curious as to, some people think you're just getting a sales rep. What are some of the things that might be involved?
Yeah, so I think having access to systems to be able to understand what's going on during a product launch, to get quick feedback, all of these things need to be built, and they're not easy to construct. Ways to get messages out simply, ways to get information back into the headquarters so that those key strategic decisions can be made. Personnel can be managed. People who are not performing can be managed out of an organization. People who are performing can be rewarded. And all of these things are, I think, far easier to do in an outsourcing situation. And to me, I think a lot of it has to do with preserving options and flexibility. When you outsource, when you insource a capability, you lose a lot of flexibility. You've built it the way that you wanted it. Hopefully that's actually contributing to your business plan and your business case. But if you want to change it, now you're entering the realm of organizational change, and that is a bureaucratic process. For the largest companies, it's very difficult to get organizations that already exist to change. And so having outsourced a capability makes it easier to change. It means we've preserved flexibility. And that's something that our investors and potential strategic acquirers are very interested in, because maybe they, in the future, just 1 or 2 years down the road, we would want to do an outsourced activity very, very differently in a new situation. And so there's a tremendous option value to be preserved through outsourcing a capability rather than building it expensively and rigidly in-house.
So I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that, or I can funnel the next question, Chris, or?
Again, I'll just go back to my experience in these startup companies. I would go so far as to say for many of these companies, again, who are founded by the engineer types, by people who are physicians in that category, that sales is almost a black box. They really don't understand the sales function, the sales cycle, the difference between, quite frankly, a very good salesperson and somebody who might be more average. And you can see it reflected when it comes time, again, for them to hire people in sales or to figure out whether they should outsource that or what exactly they should do. It's a little bit of a field of dreams sometimes in their head, unless you work with them all along the way to position them for this eventuality and how you're going to look for sales marketing people, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it. And there needs to be a lot of counseling to these small startup companies about this whole sales piece. It is not easy at all. Many of these small startup companies, quite frankly, the best paid person in the company should be somebody in sales. If a salesperson does their job well, they should be remunerated well, better, quite frankly, than the CEO. They'll have a lot of stock, and so the CEO will do just fine when the company gets sold. But it is a challenge to move some of these companies into an understanding of marketing and sales, and to recognize, much like everything else they outsource, they must, they do, it's a good thing to do, they, quite frankly, probably need to do the exact same thing for marketing and sales.
So that kind of leads me to my next question along the lines of, you now say, okay, we're looking or considering an outsource firm. We looked at a couple different options. We've talked about doing our own direct. We talked about some of the infrastructure they bring that Doug replied to. How about from specifically in a marketing and sales capacity? What part do you let them pick and choose where territories go? Do you see that done in advance? How do you think that relationship might work? And I don't know if you want to chime on that, Chris, and we'll kind of work our way across if you don't mind.
Sure. The piece that then gets, that I always get back to is that second customer. And that second customer is the acquiring company that eventually will pick up this small company that has gotten to a certain sales and revenue threshold. So in some cases, what you're looking for is the ability to be able to show sales in a defined geographic area amongst the population of physicians/patients in a certain area. And then the strategic can do the math. If you can, in the Southeast, generate X number of dollars, and the strategic has operations throughout the United States or the world, they can figure out how successful they're likely to be taking this to the next level. So there's got to be that analysis going on that understands what is the strategic looking for. And you need to have that kind of conversation and understanding with multiple strategics, because they don't all think the same, and they don't all operate the same, and they don't have all the same priorities going on. So it's a time-consuming thing for the CEOs of these startup companies to understand. And if they can get some portion of that outsourced, where they get an expertise that can help them with that, because a lot of them don't want to spend their time, quite frankly, talking to business development people from some of the large strategics and maintaining that, that conversation over time. Again, it's a logical, quite frankly, in my experience, to have that outsourced to be able to help the CEO as they move along that continuum, as they get closer to commercialization.
So I don't know if you want to comment on some of the strategic thoughts of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll actually comment as a strategic looking at buying a small company. And you know, the interesting issue is the strategic is looking to bring something on, and we have to justify it in one of two ways. It's either we have to justify it on this is how we're going to boost sales, or this is how we're going to leverage costs. And you know, the easiest way to slice that up is to sit there and say, we can sell Wall Street on costs a lot easier than we can sell sales expansion. So, you know, if we're talking to a small company, we want to see okay, where are we on the penetration level? I mean, your second customer, your third customer, your fourth customer, we want to understand that. So, you know, in my mind, the most critical part of, you know, so you don't burn a lot of calories with a strategic in the wrong way, is to sit there and say, this is where we are in this cycle, and this is where we are in this cycle. And it's usually, you know, Doug would attest to it, you know, okay, if I'm going to, you know, who makes pumps and who might be a strategic one to get in the business, you'll understand where they are, and okay, this is going to be a synergy. This is not going to be a synergy. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I don't know, for people that I work with now, one of my favorite books is a book by John Fisher called Strategic Entrepreneurism, and basically he's selling his company to Oracle, and Oracle's pushing him back, and he's trying to get a good multiple. He finds out Oracle needs Wells Fargo as a customer, so he reroutes his whole sales organization, get Wells Fargo. They get Wells Fargo, they go back, and now Oracle offers them an 18x multiple to sell. So when I think of the strategic things of a company coming to you, Those are the things I'm thinking about an outsourced company comes to. So for example, if we were talking to a company that I wanted to build a relationship with Don's organization, that customer came and said, look, we think Cardinals are a potential acquirer. I would be directing them down a strategic perspective of saying, okay, what are the hot buttons for Cardinal to buy you? And you just shared some of them, so we'd make sure that that sales team's doing it. With that said, I want to chat with you a little bit about doing a focused direct sales team versus a large sales team. And one of the common misconceptions of outsourcing is, it's like just dropping down a ton of people in an army and just putting them out in the field versus having a small group of effective folks. So I don't know if, Doug, if you mind chatting your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think having a very focused effort is critical to what we're going to be trying to accomplish with this product. Being able to actually develop relationships, to have a sales force, even if it is an outsourced selling effort, that is perceived as part of our company, belonging to CeQur. These are CeQur reps. And in fact, having it be part of the company. And in fact, we would intend to have the option to bring this organization, once it's mature, in and be part of CeQur. If we go down the route of continuing to be an independent entity, that could be extremely important to us. So, being able to have the very powerful capabilities that are constructed, I think, between the two firms as well. I think, a small startup company knows its customer, knows its value proposition better than anybody else in the world, doesn't know the kind of capabilities that an outsourcing firm has. And so it needs to be a cooperative development of, all right, so what is the go-to-market strategy? Once we've selected an outsourcing firm that has certain capabilities, how do we deliver our messages in the most effective way? How can they help us tailor our strategy so that we accomplish these things in the field that we really need to do?
Absolutely. We have a few more minutes, so if we have questions, feel free to raise your hand. But Chris, how do you feel from an investor perspective if a company's doing a small focused sales team versus trying to put a big footprint out there? When they come to you looking for investment, they're pitching a larger organization and telling you they're going to run the world. I'll get you next.
Well, my experience with Life Science Angels and our startups is we've had some failures actually with sales, very specifically one particular company that went nationwide with their product. Quite honestly, it was eyeglasses that had some electronics in the frame that allowed the glass, if you will, to know what the person was looking at distance-wise, and it could actually adjust the focal length of that. But what happened was they went nationwide with it, only to find that when people sweat, it gummed up the electronics in the thing. If they'd gone to a smaller area and worked out some of the bugs, we're all convinced that that particular company might still be alive and have returned money to us rather than gone bankrupt. So you have to be very, I think, focused and what I call strategic, and perhaps pick a small defined area geographically or specialty-wise to find out how the market actually takes or doesn't take your product. Remember, it's one thing in your clinical trials when you're paying them to test this thing, but now you're out there commercializing it and they're going to pay you. So it ends up being a different proposition, and your device gets used in different ways that you didn't envision, and circumstances happen where there just needs to be this iterative process. So I think it works the best in my experience with our companies that actually define that area where the product gets used first, relatively small, and has just a couple of sales reps that work that to be able to get that kind of feedback.
Yeah, I would also tell you in larger corporations too, they're doing a lot more skunk work, so they'll do small prototype sales teams before they make a big commitment into their financial project. So it's kind of an interesting model that while you think investors are doing it only, it's actually in large corporations as well. It's okay, I'm going to let the question go out. You have a question?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me up there?
Yeah.
Okay. So as a device development partner for small startups, 5 years ago I would have told you that we were looking for gaps in a team's capabilities. As we've run into the kinds of issues that Chris and Dunn were talking about, I would now almost say we're looking more to extend capabilities, because a team that doesn't know what they don't know requires a massive amount of re-education before they can ever get to the point they think they are at. Can you comment on your experience with that phenomenon?
Yeah, if I could just throw one pre-comment out. So in my role as an investor in the family office side, I always jokingly say we've never made a bad investment, we've only done bad due diligence. So that should have been covered in due diligence, but I'll let you all comment on that if you like.
Yeah, I'll take first whack. I think it's a great question. If people couldn't hear the question, it's basically, 5 years ago it would have been focusing on the gaps. Okay, looking at that organization, they don't have A, B, or C. And would you be better served saying, okay, they have A, but they're not world class at it, how do you extend it? And I think that's probably a good strategy. You know, one of the interesting conversations is we spent a lot of time on small companies. I would actually argue a lot of people who have booths here would like to land some of the whales. And I think you're exactly right. And if you were to talk to some of the big organizations here, and there's plenty of them, what the argument we're always having with ourselves is, where do you apply your own resources and when do you get comfortable doing it? I mean, it's the old analysis of where do you need an outside salesperson versus an inside salesperson. So I think you're spot on. And if I was one of the companies lining up over here, I do think sometimes it's an easier sell to go in and sit there and say, look, you need to focus on the top 80% of your volume, the 20% you're just not going to be good at it, we can handle that. I think where companies around the perimeter here fall down on it and where you might be more successful is make it very clear what the WIFM is. I mean, I've had probably 30 companies pitch us in the last year of like, hey, we can extend this capability for you. And it's, you know, you sit there and say, great, well, what's in it for us? And, you know, I sometimes think the presentations are very good at presenting your capabilities, but not as good of saying this is where the economic benefit is going to show up. So, you know, in a long-winded way of answering, yeah, I think your extension strategy is a good one. I would just be working pretty diligently to make sure that the WIFM is pretty crisp to whatever target you're talking to, because I think that's, I would say that's the biggest efficiency I see in some of the outsourced partners that we talk to over time.
Yeah, I would just add that you made an interesting comment about the folks around the perimeter. They actually have a much more difficult role. So when you're in the investment role, you can go or no go. But when you're funneling money into product development, and it's basically a funnel down. You know, we've dealt with companies that have 1,100 projects in the pipeline, and the question is, which one do I do, right? So and then you start to go through all these processes of which one fits, which one doesn't. So it does get very interesting in how they funnel those out. It's the same as an investor side and the same as taking the market. So can you figure out a way to do it? But when you're looking at the gaps, it's a question of which gap is the minimum. So it's a risk mitigation perspective that you flip back to. At least that's my experience. I don't know if anyone else want to comment on that?
Good answer.
No? Any other questions? Oh, go ahead,
I think
Doug.
startups come in different sizes too. I happen to be working for a rather large and well-funded startup that is taking the philosophy that we're going to hire world-class expertise at the leadership level internally, and then use that organization to build a company through outsourcing techniques quite often. I think it's a different situation if you're talking about one of these very early stage startups where you've got 4 people and you're just not going to have, particularly if those 4 people include a couple of founders whose expertise is very important but deep and narrow. You know, you're just not going to have that breadth of expertise. And then I think, you know, as you're saying, coming in and being able to essentially reboot and provide them with guidance is a tremendous value added.
Well, thank you for the question. Based on that, I think we've got our time crunch down. So I want to thank Chris, Don, and Doug very much. Thank you all as well for listening. Appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of the AdvaMed conference. Take care.